Well, my biggest prize is something that didn't happen.
Welcome to a very special holiday episode of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that explores the disagreements between the political left and right on issues of national security and foreign policy. We are calling this the Festivus edition. We are all wearing Festivus gear and engaged in something we normally don't do, eating and drinking during the show. We have some of your favorite panelists here around the table to wrap up an amazing year, 2021, and bridge to what we hope is a substantially better year in 2022. Today we have Matthew Ferraro, counsel at the international law firm Wilmer Cutler Pickering Hale and Dorr, Rob Walker, visiting NSI fellow and executive director of the Homeland Security Experts Group, Martha Miller, a Washington-based policy consultant, an analyst focusing on U.S. foreign policy, political freedom, and U.S.-Germany relations, Andrea Little-Limbago, Vice President of Research and Analysis at Interos, Jamil Jaffer, NSI founder and executive director and former chief counsel and senior advisor to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Andy Kaiser, principal at Navigators Global, Carmen Medina, NSI advisory board member and former deputy director of intelligence at the Central Intelligence Agency, Matthew Hyman, a senior fellow at NSI and the chairman of the Cyber and Privacy Working Group of the Regulatory Transparency Project, and myself, Lester Munson, senior fellow at NSI and the former staff director of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee.
We're going to ask each person here 3 questions. The first question for everyone is, what is the biggest national security story of 2021? Matt Ferraro, I'm going to you first.
All right, Les, well, it's great to be here with everyone, and happy holidays to all. So I was thinking about this question, and I could answer, of course, the rise of China, the deadly pullout from Afghanistan, Russian revanchism. There are a lot of topics, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this, the most important national security challenge has less to do with what's beyond our shores and so much more to do with what's within ourselves. And by that, I mean the unity or disunity of our people and the rising anti-democratic movement in our own country. And I can get more into that, but basically my feeling is that it cuts to the core of everything, because we are so strong. If you look at the country in other metrics, right? We have GDP of $21 trillion. We have an average annualized growth rate of about 4%. Unemployment is down. Wages are up. We have the strongest alliances on the planet. So we can get all of that stuff right. But if we fail in our most basic societal mission to maintain a unified and democratic society, then I think it's all for naught. And we basically, I wrote this in the skiff, but we can't join hands against common foes if we're always at each other's throat. And so I really do think that Lincoln was right when he said that if we were to it's wrong, of course, on air, but it's if we're gonna live 1,000 years or die by suicide. And I just think that is ever true this year. And I will say the most salient example of that, of course, is January 6th, but it's gotten so much worse over the past 11 to 12 months as these delusions have set in. And we've seen this growing movement away from our democratic ideals.
A house divided against itself cannot stand. Was that Lincoln or Shakespeare?
Well, that was Lincoln, I think. Yeah, but I'm thinking of the Lyceum speech where he said, you know, Napoleon will never take a sip of the rivers of America or lay a tract in the Blue Ridge. If we will live forever as free man or die by suicide, something like that.
So I have a feeling other folks are going to have similar answers to this question. I know I am, and we had kind of come up with a rule that you can't repeat the answer. So Matt covered a lot of ground on that. I think if you want to dive,
he took all the answers.
You
held the one that he actually stuck with, right? He listed a bunch of options.
So Abraham Lincoln quote is now ruled out for other reasons.
Yes, no one can quote Lincoln.
I'm going to look this up on my phone now.
Rob Walker, biggest story, national security for 2021.
The biggest national security story of 2021, mine is that I was really surprised to see how disorganized the Biden administration personnel rollout was. We saw in 2016 the election of an individual who was not inside of a party apparatus and didn't really have the backing of a traditional party behind him to roll out, a full and fast administration as quickly as possible.
Also lacked common sense.
Well, yes. Here we had the polar opposite of a party apparatchik, long time 70-year Democrat or whatever, a party man had the full apparatus behind him, and yet there were continuous fits and starts along the way of rolling out even the key top national security apparatus personnel, and we're still trying to get some through. Now, we can fault that on the administration and the transition teams and presidential personnel office, all of that stuff, and we can also lay the blame at the feet of the Senate. Various people are slow rolling many of the nominations, including key ambassadorships, Nick Burns to China among them. So that's been my biggest surprise. Like, we expected normalcy to return. We expected the adults to come back into the room, and we didn't quite see it at a pace that I expected, at least out of somebody who was really deeply ingrained in these processes and understanding of how the system works.
Martha Miller, what's your big story?
I will take the one that might be on many people's minds, which is Afghanistan. The really disorganized pullout of Afghanistan, in my opinion, emboldened our enemies, particularly Putin, who is now, has troops, tanks, military equipment on the, borders of Ukraine, and also domestically, this really undercut people's confidence in the commander-in-chief to take care of our men and women in uniform, and particularly the people who put themselves on the line who are not U.S. nationals, people who help us achieve our mission. So that's my thought on.
Yeah, President Biden's approval rating has not really recovered since Afghanistan. Andrea Limbago, Dr. Limbago.
Yes. So I will build upon Matthew's, but take it a bit globally. So I think in many ways it was the year of the coup. And so it wasn't January 6th kicked us off a couple months ago in September. So there was Guinea, but there also was Myanmar, Sudan. Haiti had an assassination. It's not a coup, but kind of it's in the decapitation of leadership. And following, there were a couple in 2020 as well, but I think that is just indicative of a broader global decline in democracy. And so when you have something happen in the United States that is that big of a deal, and seeing the response we've had so far, I do think it opens up the gates for to empower other countries to think that they could do it as well. It's not the not the direct causality of it, but I think it just helps accelerate other lines of thinking. And so we have seen just a lot more coups going on, I think, across the globe this year. I think that those will have ripple effects, both in for stability, but also just leads to empowering some of the the authoritarian leaders as well.
Jamil Jaffer.
Look, I think the biggest national security story of the year is the one that hasn't quite come to pass yet, and that is the extensive threats that China has made towards Taiwan, the flying over of dozens upon dozens upon dozens of fighter jets, the constant pressure that China's putting on Taiwan. I think that chicken is going to come home to roost in 2022. And I worry about that because the Chinese have watched our departure in Afghanistan. They've watched the Russians build up troops on the borders of Ukraine with little cost and only cost to be imposed after the fact. And I think that we're likely to see a potential move in that direction by the Chinese. And I think that if you had asked anybody a decade ago, nobody would have thought that was even in the cards, because it was clear the U.S. would stand up for our ally, even if we were shying away from world development a decade ago. We would at least consider steaming aircraft carrier today. To be fair to President Biden, he has done more than the Trump administration did, which is that he steamed destroyers through the Strait. But at the same time, I'm not sure that Vladimir Putin takes him seriously when it comes to a response to Ukraine. And I'm not sure President Xi takes him seriously when it comes to, well, anything.
Andy Kaiser wearing a fabulous kind of deep red velvet sport coat that makes me think I got to call my tailor. What's the biggest story of this year?
Well, when you have a jacket like this, you have to wear it when you can, because it only can come out once or twice a year. I would probably build off Jamil's and pull out a little bit on more of just the general geopolitical rebalancing that's occurring in Asia. You saw this early in 2021 with the border conflict with India that started in 20, rolled into 21, I mean, 20 people were killed in clashes on the border. You have this, obviously the world's biggest democracy, the world's largest country, most populated country, increasingly at odds, where you have the Indian government declaring, unwinding their reliance on Chinese tech in a very strategic and meaningful way to the rest of the world. That's just one example. You have Japan offering to come to the aid of the Taiwanese. You have Australia doing the same. I mean, these were not messages you heard 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So I think I would kind of build off of Jamil's, just this general rebalancing of geopolitical activity in Asia and what that means. And I think it's only going in one direction. And that's probably a concerning one for all of us.
Carmen Medina.
I like to look at little things. And when you think about what the biggest story was in 2021, we won't know for a while, right? So history will determine that. So I'm going to offer you the farmers in India forcing the Indian government to back away from its plans to sort of inject modern capitalism into the agriculture sector of India. And what I think is particularly interesting is how they did it. It was a woman-led movement, very, very poor people. There's a great article in this website that I just discovered called Crime Think, ends with a C, not a K, that is sort of a pro-anarchy website. And it's like the platform that is collecting that sort of anarchist, anti-oppressive government energy in the world. And I found the article, found what happened very compelling, and the analysis in the article that the farmers in India have shown us how we can collectively self-organize to defeat the bad guys, the evil empire. And I think that it could become a big story because I think a lot of governments are overextended because of COVID. There's a lot of debt on the table. Argentina is having to go to the IMF. Turkey is doing whatever they're doing economically. And so I think this idea of popular revolt and just unwillingness to do what the elites say is good for them is the biggest story of 2021 and exemplified by the farmers in India.
All right, Matthew Hyman, can you match that Vox Populi best biggest story of the year?
No, but I will offer what I think is, to me, the most remarkable kind of national security story of 2021, and I'm taking a very U.S. focus on this, but I'd call it operational incompetence within the Biden administration. This is a theme that someone else around the table sort of picked up on in the context of appointments, but it is highlighted in the Afghanistan pullout. It's clear that the president knew he was going to pull out, and I don't think the pullout itself is the story. It's just the staggering incompetence at every phase, in every department, at every political level of the executive branch, and the execution of what everyone knew was coming, and no one seemed to give any thought to how to do it, how to coordinate it, how to talk to allies, how to extract our people and the people on the ground that helped us there. It was just amazing, particularly against the backdrop of a man that spent his entire career thinking about national security issues and all
being
of
on the wrong
people,
side of them, according to Bob Gates.
According to Bob Gates.
and I don't argue with Bob Gates on that front, but in any event, and he had this collection of national security people around him that have lots of experience, and to see this team of supposed pros who are going to bring sanity to national security problem solving, to see them botch it this badly was just, to me, a remarkably scary story for 2021. And it gives me extreme pause, putting aside the fact that I was already predisposed to disagree with most Biden administration national security priorities, just extreme pause about how can they possibly execute anything else of substance going forward if they couldn't do that.
Well, no price. Nobody was held accountable.
Not a single firing.
So for my biggest national security story of 2021, I'm going to go with the insurrection on January 6th, which I know was not strictly.
It's already taken.
No, I don't know. I don't think that's true. what Matt talked about was kind of a broad questioning of democratic values. I'm talking about the specific episode. And to be fair to me, that's exactly why
Allow
I
me to be fair to
responded
myself.
to his answer earlier the way I did, was to reserve the right for me to bring this up as my biggest
I
story.
consider
of
it a plus
2021.
one plus a little more. So, you know, I think it's
So for me, that's the issue that has been part of every other thing that has happened this year. We could not have done anything else that would have more questioned our allies' trust in us and our steadfastness on the democracy and rule of law question than what happened.
You remember the
when-
fact that we sacrificed it on a single day
Yeah,
at the US
and in-
Capitol
and in
and
such
threw it
an
all away.
incredibly stupid manner. I think if you're looking for a silver lining in it, the virtue is that we saw up close and personal for several hours exactly what the nature of the Trump administration was. And I think a lot of it, and I count myself as someone who was surprised that things went that far. I think other people were surprised, but at least we got it out there. We know what we're dealing with now, and we can take steps to make sure it doesn't happen.
I mean, we learned this week that Donald Trump Jr. was surprised and called for the
Exactly.
president to be a
Exactly.
leader and pull it back.
Well,
Furious texts to the chief of staff begging,
Right.
please tell dad to do something.
maybe he wasn't able to text his
Sean
dad
Hannity
directly.
more reasonable than Donald Trump.
Really, I mean, that is
For a day.
shocking.
So, all right, so we just went around on the biggest story of 2021. We're now going to kind of fantasy football draft style snake back in the other direction and do and have everyone answer the second question, which was your biggest surprise? What do you say is the biggest surprise story of 2021? And I'm going to go first, and I'm going to say that I was surprised at how much President Biden is like President Trump in his national security policy.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
And,
Yeah, fair
on-
point.
not in every way, of course, but in significant ways, this president is just like the last president. He's making an appeal to the American working class, even a little more explicitly than Trump is in some ways. He's anti-free trade. He's kept up tariffs on Canada. He's kept up tariffs on the EU, although there's been some progress on that front. He's kept every single tariff on China, even those that are to the detriment of American consumers and American manufacturers. He has been awkward in his coordination with allies, which none of us were expecting. And also his withdrawal from Afghanistan was probably the most Trump-like thing he did
Yes.
all
Yes.
year. Again, we're all surprised at how bad it was, much like my previous answer on January 6th. So that is my surprise story of 2021.
But it was-
Matt?
He followed
but-
through on things
Yeah.
Trump
Wish he could've.
wished he said he
Yeah.
would do, but didn't do.
No, but I think what's interesting, what's even more interesting is specifically as you dive into Afghanistan, to your point, Les, right? Not only did he make a rash gut instinct decision, the same way Trump would have, right? He doubled down on it when it was clear that it wasn't going well. He told the American people everything's fine when it clearly was not. And then he took responsibility while blaming everybody but himself for the entire problem. I mean, straight out of the Donald Trump playbook, Joe Biden. I mean, it is laughable. And by the way, and the best part about it is, just like Trump, no self-reflection that he just behaved like Donald Trump.
And not taking his best national security advice.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That
no,
was
exactly.
Yes.
rejecting it out of
Rejecting
hand,
Rejecting it.
Yeah,
ignoring the generals.
because
Well,
it didn't meet his mold of how things were going to go.
Including active criticism
Yeah.
of military leadership.
Yes.
Maybe
Actually,
in a
literally
slightly different tone,
blaming-
but in basically
Oh,
the
yeah.
same way Trump did.
Yeah.
blaming our closest allies, throwing them under the bus.
Yes.
You know, it's the Afghans' fault. They only lost 60,000 people. We lost 3,000. It's their fault. They wouldn't fight for their own country. Oh, by the way, yeah, don't forget about the Americans who left. And well, you know, they have families in Afghanistan. They don't really want to come to the United States. I mean, is that
Right.
code? What's that code for? I think I know what that's code for. And I thought the Democrats were good on this stuff. They're not race baiting at all. Oh, or you know, or religion baiting at all. No, Joe Biden would never do that. Oh, wait.
Except he did. So Joe Biden specifically campaigned on restoring American leadership in the world.
Yeah.
Whoever replaces him is going to have to campaign on the same thing. All right, over to you, Matthew.
I'm not sure that it's the biggest surprise of the year, but I'm continually, and I mentioned this on a previous podcast, I'm surprised that there is a leader of a country today that thinks that that completely is in opposition to any rational thought about how economies work. And I'm talking about Erdogan and Turkey.
Mhm.
And this idea that, a flailing lira can be helped by the policies he's promoting. And the way to get value in your currency back is to keep interest rates staggeringly low. It's a fascinating view. And while I understand dictators will do odd things, it's odd to hear him saying, no, this is actually the formula for success, rather than just doing it quietly and sort of ignoring IMF, World Bank, and other world leaders. So, I mean, to me, that was a real surprise to see someone just really sort of in almost a Don Quixote-like way, sort of just tilt right against the windmill of common sense.
Excellent macroeconomic lateral move there,
Yeah.
Mr.
I
Hyman.
have been to Turkey and didn't remember that it was the lira. I literally looked it up because I'm like, it can't be the lira. That can't be right. And sure enough, he was totally right.
Carmen, your biggest surprise.
Well, my biggest surprise is something that didn't happen, which is that no government has ended up handling COVID well. I mean, when we entered 2021, people were saying, hey, New Zealand, super great. And a lot of the Asian countries, they're doing much better than us. And Biden's going to do better than Trump. And we all know that, I will say, really through no fault of Biden, just because of the way disease works, more Americans have died in 2021 than have died in 2020. So I think the fact that nobody could handle COVID should inject some humility and in the way we all think about what government can or cannot do, and sort of understand that, we are inhabitants of this little piece of rock that orbits the sun, and there's all this natural biology that's going on, and we don't control one fingernail of it when you get right down to it.
This isn't medical advice, but I got Delta. I recommend people get Omicron. If you're thinking about getting the virus, don't get Delta.
I got an alpha. I got the original. I was an early adopter of the trend.
I think that might have been a bad move.
No, I survived, so it was a good move, right?
Andy Kaiser.
Okay, I think it's not actually close. So mine, I'm glad it still survived. This Australian, French, UK spat over the sub deal.
Oh.
Unthinkable that you would have, major Western democracies. Yeah, well, major Western democracies withdrawing ambassadors and this huge rift of, diplomatic puffery. Was all very interesting, very surprising how that shook out. Again, we're also I think during the Bush years, especially, we were against our allies because we didn't do exactly what the French and the Germans wanted us to do at every step. And for them to poke directly, like one of the leaders of the of NATO and key Western ally, and to see it shake out in such a public spat was astounding.
Jamil Jaffer, what's your surprise?
So I think the biggest national security surprise of the year is the fact that the Biden administration is not back in the Iran nuclear deal. I mean, this is an administration that came in, committed to getting back into it, and gave up their leverage early on, in an effort to get back in, and actually kind of shockingly has had the cojones to not get right back in, and has stayed away, and they've actually avoided the biggest flaw of the Obama administration, which was negotiate, and just give and give and give at the till to the Iranians. They've actually, after giving the first time, have sort of held the line, and I'm actually kind of grudgingly impressed.
What? Are you being nice on the Iranian?
I will
What is
discourage
going
him.
on?
I will say that I don't think it will last.
The duck is coming. Here it comes.
They are dying for this deal. As we
your office.
Where is
as-
she?
as we've discussed at this table repeatedly, the Biden administration's foreign policy has been an utter disaster, like the Obama administration's before it. And so they're looking for a win, and this may be the one, and they may, just like the Obama administration, give and give and give to get to it. But at least as of right now, they appear to be holding the line, which is Not what I expected. You never know, though. It is the Christmas season, and maybe Joe Biden will be in a giving spirit, and the Ayatollah Sistani will be the beneficiary of a Christmas miracle from one Joe Biden. We shall see.
Andrea, what's your surprise?
I thought Andy was going to take it, but then I'll build upon it, so you
You
get
have
me
an
nervous
obvious
for a
one,
minute.
too.
That I think Australia is leading the way and pushing back on China.
Yes, they are, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yep.
Amazing, huh?
Yeah.
It isn't, yeah, I mean, they are far, and like even things that we're doing, they did first. So they
Yeah.
were one of the first to ban Huawei.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so I feel like
Totally.
they were able to do like a global campaign to get everyone to buy Australian wine. I did. I got my friends to buy Australian wine. We all did it. And the submarine deployment, that's a big aspect of it. And so I think that they really are the leader right now in showing how to push back on China and how economic warfare can be done by democracies.
Right, that's a good point.
And to
Love it.
take those hits and
Exactly.
and not
Yes.
capitulate.
It's like when Canada under Stephen Harper was like a leading light on
Yeah.
foreign policy and national security. You're like, what, Canada? Or the 51st state? Really?
The Mounties
But
involved.
didn't they do economic warfare against France by changing their contract for the submarine?
Who's their word?
And they did this while everyone was locked in their houses
Oh,
because
yeah,
of COVID.
exactly. Yeah.
Martha Miller.
So perhaps not the biggest national security surprise. It'll be, okay, my answer is twofold. One is my surprise, the Democrats did not support sanctioning Nord Stream 2 in the defense bill in the Senate.
They did shut down Keystone, which is always so. Keystone's good. Pipelines at home
Keystone's
bad.
good.
Russian
Yeah.
gas pipelines.
Yeah,
It's all
good,
fine.
right.
It's fine. It's fine.
So that was a surprise here at home. I would say, a positive surprise was the Green Party going into government in Germany. Annalena Baerbock has led the charge within Germany against Nord Stream 2.
I was confused how are you getting the good part of the Green Party coming into government. I'm like, I'm not sure.
This is not your father's Green Party.
This is not your father's Green Party. They are
Follow her
no
logic,
longer out there protesting against the United States. They are a strong voice within Germany against authoritarianism in Russia, authoritarianism in China. And so it'll be interesting to watch how this shakes out in the coming months between her leadership as foreign minister and Scholz as chancellor from the SPD party, which supports Nord Stream 2.
Very good. Rob, your biggest surprise.
So I think I heard the question incorrectly last time. So my biggest surprise was the Biden administration not filling its national security positions rapidly and at a pace that we expected to see from professional, experience and teams. So then let me go back and say my biggest story, I think, and this will expose my homeland roots here, is the complete disregard for border enforcement at the southwest border and the compounding second and third order effects that presents. I mean, we've got immigrants coming across the border from multiple areas around the globe, multiple nationalities, multiple races that are not being tested for COVID, and we're still talking about locking down Americans and keeping ourselves sequestered and quarantined from COVID. Yet we're not testing those folks coming across the border illegally. We've also got now an administration going against one of its own federal law enforcement apparatus with a completely made up and mischaracterized story from a single photo. I'm talking about the horse, quote unquote, whipping incident from the Haitian migration from August, if memory serves correctly, when the journalist who took the photo has spoken on the record saying, no, there was no whipping whatsoever. It was a spinning of the reins. So it just, you get all of these incremental, seemingly, to Carmen's point, small micro steps and issues that begin to erode at the institutional understanding of, a sovereign nation is not sovereign if it can't enforce its own borders, if it can't determine who's allowed to come in legally and lawfully, if it doesn't support its own national security and law enforcement apparatus. So I'm wondering if this wasn't in some part partially planned, partially on their mind from the beginning, and I haven't even mentioned the fact, I guess I will now, the vice president is then put in charge of solving. Thanks, Jamil. Solving the push factors, gets interviewed 6 weeks later, and have you been to the Southwest border? And then tries to pivot towards, well, I haven't even been to Europe. Well, that in itself is a problem. As you, the VP, being in the seat for 5 months now, haven't been to Europe either. But Madam Vice President, you were put in charge of solving the Southwest border issue, and you haven't even been to see the scope of the issue. So that also shows me there's a strong disconnect in this administration with reality. Like the DC bubble matters so much to them, and making sure we get all of the right talking points and all the right people in place, and all the right press coverage, but getting out to see just the fundamental problem set on the ground. Just it frustrates me that she would answer something like that so flippantly when she was publicly acknowledged as the head of the fix of the solution.
Well, can I ask you a question about that?
Please.
So you mentioned this point about sort of COVID testing at the border of
Yeah.
illegal immigrants. And I mean, look, I don't disagree. We need to do a better job on border enforcement and have for a long time. But I mean, no president in modern history has been able to solve the challenges of southern border
Admittedly,
and prevent.
right.
And frankly, there are economic reasons why we actually want some level of quote unquote illegal immigration into the country.
Yep.
To take certain farm agricultural jobs and the like. But I'm trying to understand how would you implement the COVID test the border of the illegals? We can't catch them and stop them. We're going to COVID test them? Like, what am I
Well,
missing here?
I mean, it's two different populations here, Jamil. You can COVID test the ones you catch. Obviously, you can't.
So we're COVID
Yeah, so what
testing
you-
them, right? We are COVID testing, aren't we?
Yes,
Okay.
I don't think it's as broad as we, in fact, test the Border Patrol. And granted, I think we should be testing and vaccinating the Border Patrol, it's for their own good and for the good of the law enforcement entity. But I can't speak with certainty that we are 100% testing every legal or non-legal crosser of the border, nor can I attest to the fact that we are mandating vaccines onto those individuals coming across the border.
Okay.
Matt Ferraro, you're the pivot here, so we need to hear the biggest surprise story of 2021, and then you get to do our first prediction for next year.
I prefer fulcrum.
As you wish.
The amazing competence of the Biden administration. Let me just.
I've been most surprised by the expansion of what we mean when we say national security to encompass more and more things. I think that's my big surprise this year. And it means everything from supply chain to pharmaceuticals to semiconductor chips, critical minerals, and to include
Antitrust.
Sure, antitrust.
That was a
may have had
big
an event about
NSI
that.
initiative for the
Right,
last few
right.
months, was the connection between
lot of
national
emails.
security and antitrust.
Right. There was
Thank you,
so
Jamil.
many installments this week.
Many. I think
Installment
five.
number 8.
Five.
A lot of emails about that one.
And I would just say on this that I think that the causes are fairly obvious. The pandemic being one, the rise of China being another, and also the simple fact that for the government to play a greater role in all of these things, they have to be classified as national security issues. That's where like the government's prerogatives lie. And I don't see that changing going forward. And actually, to your point, Les, before, I think that is something that we saw beginning in the Trump administration and continuing now in the Biden administration, and indeed, I think globally.
Rob, your
Yes.
your prediction. Predict one thing that will happen next year.
I think Jamil hit on it earlier, and I think we're seeing it unfold before our eyes, and that is that China, if not a full invasion, will rehearse an invasion of Taiwan.
Martha.
I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that Joe Biden will become more hawkish in response and the lead up to the midterms, and in response to the criticism he received for Afghanistan and the more recent talks with Putin.
Any thought as to where he demonstrates this hawkishness?
Well, we'll see. I don't know. He'll have to first demonstrate it, in my opinion, and with Europe.
Right.
Okay. Andrea.
So I like to do this more like optimistic. So go climate change, that's going to be bad. So we're not going to go down that route. I think we're going to see just some interesting shifts in alliances. So we're finally going to start seeing, especially hopefully among democracies, different kinds of techno, supply chain, and so forth, collaborative efforts going on. We're already seeing a couple of the quads starting to gain more power out there. With some of the democracies, we had US, Denmark, Norway, and Australia start talking about coordinating their export controls. So I think we're going to start seeing some more interesting ways that democracies are finally hopefully going to start pushing back together as a collective resilience against this authoritarian wave that's been going for the last decade.
Jamil, crystal ball.
I think we will see a crippling cyber attack somewhere in the globe, fomented by a nation state but masquerading as a criminal attack.
That's easy, man.
We haven't seen it
It's
yet.
like
I mean,
saying
we
the
got
sun will
close.
rise.
We got close. We got close to Colonial Pipeline. It didn't happen.
Is it,
Hasn't happened
Is it
yet.
Russia? Is Russia masquerading as the
Russia or China? It'll be Russia or China. And it may not be intentional. Look at NotPetya, right? I mean, there's a case
Yeah.
where Russia's going up against Ukraine, tried to have a narrow focused attack, caused $10 billion in damage worldwide unintentionally. Collateral damage was the problem. I do think this will have some level of intentionality to it, and it'll be a nation state acting through a proxy, like a criminal hacker gang.
Well, they've bought some of their exploits through a private company, and that's where I think they're. We're
That's
seeing
a
a
good
lot. We're
question.
seeing a lot going on with NSO
Yeah.
Group, but NSO Group is not the only one.
No, not the only one. Yeah. I don't know. Good question.
Andy Kaiser?
Okay, mine's building off of Martha's. I think, some of the history of the Fault Lines podcast is to discuss the political divide between right and left. So I'll stick to that theme. The House will be retaken by the Republican Party, which will be the best thing that ever happened to Joe Biden, because he can tell the left that, sorry, it's not my fault, those bad guys. Now he can be who he wants to be, in my view, which is somewhere in the middle and likely in a more hawkish position going forward, particularly after that. But I think even as that date gets closer and becomes more inevitable.
Same
Bill-
Clinton.
The Bill Clinton model. Yeah.
Triangulate.
Interesting.
Yeah. Carmen.
I think one thing that will happen next year is that we will have an orange revolution, by which I mean people-led revolution, bottom-up, grassroots in a Western, more or less democracy. Might be in Latin America, a place like Argentina, might be in Asia or someplace else. I think that, building on my farmers and this sort of self-organizing, and I think we should look seriously at what happened mostly in California a couple of weeks ago, where people use social media to self-organize and overwhelm security guards at Best Buy or Nordstrom. And, you can only do that once, but if you're smart and organize it at scale and know what you're doing, I think you can create a lot of havoc. So that's my prediction.
Matthew.
We're going to continue to see a complete reshaping of diplomatic relations in the Middle East. This week, we saw the Israelis meet with the UAE.
Go to the UAE.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They went to the UAE,
Not Louis
and
Bennett,
we're going
of
to
all people.
see more of that in 2022. And I will predict that there will be full diplomatic relations and exchange of ambassadors between Israel and Saudi Arabia, which will be a momentous event.
Before the king dies or after the
And-
king dies?
I
double
think it'll be-
prediction.
I think it
Who's
could happen-
facilitating the king's death?
I think it could happen before the king
Really?
dies. And all of this is the result of Iran and the election this year of a hardliner and their continued bad acts in the region. And so we're going to just see more of it, and it's going to become normal that the Israelis are showing up in Arabic capitals with their full diplomatic teams. And as a result, the Palestinian issue will continue to recede into the background.
Can we also give credit to Robert O'Brien and the national security apparatus from the Trump administration for the Abraham Accords? It's not entirely on Iran.
I'll give a certain amount of credit, but it's sort of, in my view, this is a good thing, and victory has many fathers. So
Yes.
whether it's the badness of Iran or the recognition, I think, of a lot of Arabic states that, our economies are moribund. We need the genius and energy of the Israelis and what they can offer to us and FDI. Some part of the credit goes to Robert O'Brien and Brian Hook and folks like that.
Jared
that talk
Kushner.
about- and
Jared
Jared-
Kushner,
to a
yeah.
certain extent, yeah.
It really does.
It
But-
is. So
But that's the dynamic in the
It's hard
Middle
to
East.
say, but it's
It is
true.
hard to say, but
And I will,
It is.
and I'll say, no one would have predicted this 4 years ago.
no, not
No.
no.
Well, the other thing
Now,
I
do
would
you
say,
think- Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I would just say, like, the other thing I would add is the strength of Israel. And I just
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
the
Yes.
bipartisan commitment to Israel's national security over decades has given Israel the means to basically the room to maneuver.
And also
And
credit-
formalizing relationships that were there, right?
That's
exactly-
they've-
that's
a
right.
lot of these exchanges have been going on for
That's right.
decades.
And credit to the Israeli democracy where they had to go through 3 or 4 deadlocked elections. And
gosh,
they're still
yes.
able to get stuff done on the international stage.
Now, do you think the Israelis will make and the Arabs may be together? The Arab states will make a demonstration project Lebanon, which is in such a horrible, horrible
That would be incredible.
state right
Yeah.
now. I mean, it's really a bad situation. And of course, by trying to stabilize Lebanon, you are in fact sort of in conflict with Hezbollah,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
You
Yes.
know,
They could
and
address the
that might
Palestinian
be
issue as well.
that might be a convenient thing
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
do. So
That's my 2023.
Slow down, Carmen.
Didn't MBS sort of try to do that when he invited the prime minister
Yeah,
to visit for a
yeah.
while and he didn't let him leave?
It's been great.
No, you're good. You should stay. You're my guest. You stay as long as I want you to.
Ritz is very lovely. Ritz is very nice.
Just ask about my cousins.
All right, my prediction for next year is the end of the International Olympic Committee and wholesale
Wow.
changes in the Olympics. Nobody wants the Olympics to happen in February of 2022 in
that's
Beijing.
correct.
In
Beijing
Beijing.
doesn't want them. The corporate
Except the
sponsors don't want it
athletes.
to happen. The athletes are in a hell of a pickle.
Because they got to do
The
something
IOC
now. Now they have
itself
to.
has nowhere good to go on this thing. And one of the amazing aspects of the sports story is that it is all led by women,
Mhm.
right? We saw in professional sports in this country, the WNBA became very political last year to a huge effect. It was the women's gymnastics team that
Yes.
got outraged
Absolutely.
at their organization, their US organization, because of the predations of that doctor and some other folks.
Very nice.
We're seeing the Women's Tennis Association
Lead the charge,
lead the
yeah.
charge
on-
on Peng
on-
Shuai,
Yeah.
which is amazing. And somebody picked Elon Musk to be the
Ridiculous.
the
Yeah.
man of the year. It should have been the guard or the police officer at the
Yes.
Capitol
100%.
who prevented worse things from happening. It could also be the Women's Tennis Association of
Yes.
the United States
Yeah.
for doing the right thing.
Unlike
I
the
think it's
unlike the
just good.
NBA, to be clear,
Exactly.
which has been
Exactly. With the
a
exception of-
national
Or most of
embarrassment.
Right,
With the
right.
exception of
Shield
Venus
for China.
Cantor, with the exception of Venus
And
Cantor.
But the
Cantor,
NBA
yeah.
And so I think,
Yeah.
and so I think we're going to see something happen in Beijing in February, probably led by female athletes to protest the outrageous behavior of the Chinese government on any number of fronts. And I think this is going to be the end of the modern Olympic movement as we know it. And we're
Wow.
going to have to scramble to put it back together after this.
I don't know. They survived Hitler and Jesse Owens. I mean, it's
Yeah, but the women weren't involved then. Now they are, and they're not going to put up with this nonsense anymore.
Just back to
Yeah.
Athens every
Yeah.
year.
And the
Every year.
guys
That
are
one
gonna
worked
go,
out
okay.
so well.
The guys are going, all right.
Run a marathon.
Exactly. Keep it real.
It may have returned to amateur status, not these pros going in.
Yeah.
All right, that's a wrap. Thanks, everybody. Great end of the year conversation.
Happy holidays.
happy holiday.
As always, Fault Lines is produced by the National Security Institute. Find out more about the Institute and upcoming events at nationalsecurity.gmu.edu. If you have any topics you'd like us to cover, send us an email at nsi@gmu.edu or tweet us at MasonNetSec. If you like what we are doing here, please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe so that more people can find our show. We'd like to thank Claude Jennings for editing and the terrific stars of the NSI staff, Ruth Zhou, Maeve Cronin, and Jessica Jones for production assistance. Thank you for tuning in and joining us this past year, and be sure to tune in for more provocative conversations and further analysis of national security's fault lines.